In the case of South India, we come across a layered society where at the very top there were the state functionaries. They had the right, or they could dispose of their soil or part of their income from the soil. Then there was a group of intermediaries that was growing up, particularly in the form of the Vigyapti, or the landowners, the Vellalas, or the very substantial agriculturists that were growing up, a stratum that was growing up, and beneath there were the peasants. Another most important aspect that we now should focus upon, that is, the agriculture was expanding, and earlier in the Sangam period, as I have referred very cursorily, in Sangam period it was divided into 5 Tinai, of which one, the Marudam Tinai, constituted the agricultural land or the area which was conducive to agriculture, particularly in the riverine delta zone. But now, with the inception of this new kingship, the Pallava and the Pandyan kingship, we find that the agricultural zone was increasing, and that already I have referred to because of the expansion of irrigation, and particularly the tank irrigation. There were well irrigation as well, but in the case of South India, tank irrigation, unlike parts of northwestern India, was more important than the well irrigation. The tanks basically are a very good rainwater harvesting system, though sometimes in many cases in South India, particularly the larger lakes are sometimes fed with the river water as well, brought from the canals dug, but in most of the cases it is the rainwater harvesting. And nowadays lot amount of research is being done on the tank irrigation in South India. The tanks, they were dug, constructed particularly in the favorable zones where the water was passing through a gorge or was getting collected in a particular place. Bunds were built so that the water, either the rainwater or the river water, could be impounded into, and this created huge lakes which were then used for different purposes, of which irrigation was one among the many purposes that the tanks were built. Some of these tanks, they are still existing, which were constructed during the period of the Pallava or the Pandyan kingdom. Some of them, they still exist. For instance, the Mahendra Tarag, which was constructed in Mahendravadi, now falling in the Kanchipuram district, or the famous Vairamegha Tarag, which was constructed in the famous Brahmadeya in Uttiramerur or Uttaramerur, which also falls in the Kanchipuram district. Earlier it was in the Chengalpet district, or Kaveri Pakkam, which was constructed during the time of Nandi Tellarar in the Nandi Pottarayar, that is Nandi Varman the third, the Pallava king. These tanks, they are very simple devices, but they are fragile in its nature. That means constant supervision should be done to keep these devices or the water bodies in a good working condition, and this was done sometimes by the state intervention, but most of the cases this was done by the community, local community, and here the village assemblies took a very significant role. One, that is the construction, conservation and continuous management of the water body should be done, that is dredging should be done, so that the desiltation is taking place very regularly, so that the water body remains in a good shape. And then the most important thing is the sharing of this water, particularly among the farmers, because this could lead into very serious disputes, sometimes leading into bloody bloodshed. So, the village assemblies took a very significant role in this case. The Pallava inscriptions have references, particularly in the later period, have references to Eri Variya Perumakkal, those people entrusted from the village assembly to look after these water bodies, and land was also allocated, particularly known as Eripatti. The income from this land, the produce of this land being sold, and the income from this land going into the preservation, conservation of these water bodies. And these things, sometimes land was being granted either by the private persons or sometimes by the village assemblies themselves for upkeep of these tanks, and a tank committee was looking after the income as well as its proper utilization. And where it was not land, but the donation was done, the endowment was given in the form of gold, pon, gold being this gold went into the coffers of that particular tank committee, who then utilized this fund. They invested this amount into the into some enterprise, and the interest that accrued from this investment was then utilized for the upkeep. That is, sometimes dredging was done either thrice in a year or sometimes twice in a year, or even sometimes every month dredging was done as per the conditions during the time of endowment that has been given by the particular donor. So, this all led into a very notable management, water management system that was mainly controlled by the local bodies, local authorities. Now, regarding the technology, because there was a very significant technological innovation, particularly the introduction of stone sluices. Either it was known as tumbu or kurungu, and these sluices actually maintained or controlled the water that flew from the tank into the channels, or it also led the overflow of the water, particularly during the incessant rain or when the river was very full. It led into the excess water to flow out, so that the bunds do not get destroyed, and this was a very important, a very significant innovation. Apart from that, channels were being dug, and they were known by different names, particularly Arukal. But not only Arukal, they were also known as Vayakal, Kal, Kilaikal, Odai, etc. They had different types of functions as well. The branch channels that was dug from the main channel, that was known as Kal or Odai. Then we have the inundation channels being cut, so that the river, when being overflooded, the excess water can flow from through these channels into the adjoining fields. We find, particularly in a case of Brahmadeya, which is known as Ekadhira Mangalam, that the inundation channels played a significant role in watering the adjacent agricultural fields. Then we have Urukal, that is the spring channels being cut. When the river became fully dry, then also the river was dug, so that the underneath water, the ground water can come up, which could then be used for irrigation purpose. And all these things we should keep in mind, that this was being looked after by the different committees, which was supervised by the village assembly. Whenever one person wanted to dig a tank or a well for his personal use, for agricultural purpose or otherwise, because not only agriculture, it could be used for drinking purposes as well, they had to take permission from the village assembly, and they had to pay a particular amount to the village assembly. But when the village assembly collectively took a decision of constructing a tank, they should take, or they took permission from the higher authorities, particularly the central authority. The king and his administration gave the permission to construct the tank. Among the pariharas, that is the exemptions or list of the tax exemptions that we find in the inscriptions, particularly meant for the donis, who religious functionaries who got land from the king, we find a term nervayam, that is, the king could impose fine on the excess water being consumed by a particular person. King generally imposed a kind of fine on that, and this actually went into the coffers, and in this case parihara, this tax would then not go into the coffers of the king, but go either to the doni, or if it is a tax free land, the tax is altogether exempted. So, it shows that the control of water played a significant role for the expansion of agriculture, and this actually led into the integration of otherwise isolated agrarian zone, agrarian regions into a sprawling township, or the, as I told at the very beginning, the resource base of the state was also increasing because of these activities, particularly made by the religious functionaries as the Brahmadeyas or the temples. an idea about the artisanal production can be gathered again from the pariharas, that is the list of the tax exemptions, where name of different types of activities and the tax imposed upon them, particularly the ironmongers or the salt makers, salt pan owners, they all had to pay certain kind of taxes, and from these list of taxes we can have an idea about what kind of artisanal productions were taking place in the Pallava and the Pandyan country. Some oblique references also help us to form an idea. Marambavai, who was the queen of Nandivarman III, when she grants a land to a Brahmadeya, a kind of cloth merchant, a group of cloth merchant, they were entrusted with look after of this particular institution. They were known as Aruvai Vanigar. So, we can have the idea that in the Pallava period, some cloth merchants, they were also playing a significant role in society. From these oblique references, an idea about the artisanal productions can be formed. In the case of trade, we find that in North India in the same period, the main discussion is on the trade, decline of trade, the trade declining because of some external factors as well as some internal factors as well, and this actually strengthening the ideas of the inception of Indian feudalism. But in the South Indian case, the trade, a brisk trade went on even in this period from 600 to 1200. Though unlike in the Sangam context or the context of Sangam, where the Greek and the Roman traders were playing very significant role in trade activities, and huge amount of Roman coins have been unearthed because of the archaeological excavations. These activities were not there, but some guilds or traders organizations were coming into being, particularly from the late 7th and 8th century onwards, which continue up to the 14th century. Here we will refer to different organizations like the Ayavol Ainnuttruvar Tisai Ayavol Tisai Airattu Ainnuttruvar, a group which originates from Ayavol, which is also known as Ohichatro or Arjapur, situated in Karnataka, that is situated presently in Hungund Taluk in Bijapur district of Karnataka. There a group of 500, it is said, Swamis or Chaturvedis, Brahmins, coming together to form an association to control the trade. Actually, Kenneth Hall, a historian, he has opposed this view, but Meera Abraham has shown with sufficient amount of material that it was possibly the influential Brahmins or influential people coming together rather than some traders residing in the peripheral zone, as argued by Kenneth Hall. Meera Abraham is arguing that it is basically some very influential people coming together to control the local trade, and this actually results in the origin of this very important guild or organization, as said by Champakalakshmi, that played a very significant role in trade from 8th century onwards, and it continues up to 14th century. Though it is said that this very important guild or organization originated in Ayavul, but later it became a very important supralocal organization, not just having Ayavul as its headquarters, but spread in different parts of South India and even overseas, because inscriptions have been found of this organization ranging from Sri Lanka to different countries in Southeast Asia, which shows the spread of their activities. Not only Ayavul, but other organizations like Manigramam and Anjuvanam also occur in the inscriptional evidences. A bit later from our period, that is from 600, strictly speaking from 600 to 900, but one can argue that the ground was being prepared in this period. Anjuvanam was a group of foreign merchants. In our period, it was possibly a group of Jewish merchants, which later became or denoted a group dominated by the Arab merchant, whereas Manigramam, unlike Ayavul, which was spread on a huge expanse, it was confined in particular locations. So, these merchant organizations were coalescing, coming together and working for betterment of the both organizations. Ayavul not only was involved in trade, but it had a particular code of conduct known as Vananju Dharma, which made it very distinct, very separate from other organizations, as well as the mercenary element that they involved for protection of their merchandise, either on the way when the caravan was going from place to place, or they also built up some protected establishments which were known as Eri Veera Pattana, which was protected by the Eri Veeras, the mercenaries employed by the merchants, or Munai Veeras. So, this makes the involvement of military power, adding firepower to as well as protection to the merchants or the caravans, it makes the Ayavul very significant one, very distinct type of organization, and with widespread activities ranging from different parts of South India to Southeast Asia. It makes Ayavul a very important organization of this period. This was happening, unlike the earlier period confined to the littoral zone because of the coming of the foreign traders. This revival of trade or the expansion of trade was happening because of, it seems, the expansion of the agrarian base as a result of the expansion of agriculture from the irrigation, expansion of irrigational facilities. With this, we come to an end on our discussion on economy of South India, confining ourselves between 600 to 900.